Hello, good morning. Welcome to the second International Burnout Awareness Week. I'm Carol Milters. I'm a writer, a facilitator, and an investigator on burnout and mental health at work. I'm originally from Brazil, but I've been living in the Netherlands for the last 5 years, where I had a second episode of burnout. And since 2017, 2018, I've been writing about it, and I have been raising awareness on this issue. And this is the second edition of the International Burnout Awareness Week. This will take place between November 29th, that was yesterday, with panels in Portuguese, until December the 3rd on Friday, and we'll broadcast live here on YouTube. There will be more than 20 panels from over 6 countries in English and Portuguese with specialists on the subject and people who have lived and are living through the syndrome. The purpose of this event is to responsibly raise awareness around burnout and help eliminate the stigma surrounding it, in addition to intensifying the dissemination of its causes, consequences, and treatments. The panels will be divided into tracks, including health and well-being, culture and society, the role of organizations, and burnout stories. In the first edition last year, 2020, the Awareness Week attracted over 300 subscribers and panelists from 5 countries in English and Portuguese, broadcasting more than 15 hours of content. And the forecast for this year, we already have over 500 subscribers from different parts of the world. This content is not a substitute for a treatment by a qualified healthcare professional. When listening to the stories, if you feel like you need help, contact a professional. We encourage the conscious consumption of content. Watch us when you can, the way you can, for as long as you can. It may be a lot, and we do not expect you to be on top of everything in this event and in life in general. Some concepts may be complex or even triggering for you. If you need to take a break and take a breath, that's okay. All the talks will be available afterwards in this very same link for as long as you need, so you can come back whenever you're ready again. This event is sponsored by Zen Club, a Brazilian online mental health platform that has a network of experts such as psychologists, psychoanalysts, and therapists. We are also grateful for the support of Instituto Bem-Estar, a Brazilian nonprofit organization that aims to promote the health of the mind. My goal with this opening panel today, that is talking about a future that doesn't deplete us, is to raise this question on until when are we able to do it all? We are now, I think a lot of us are well aware of the dangers of overworking, but we are still trapped in this treadmill of always running, always late. We never have time for anything. And I think that we really need to take a step back and think about what are the consequences of that in every aspect of our lives. And with this event, I have started creating this event, and I had the idea of the Burnout Awareness Week over 2 or 3 years ago, almost, when I was still burned out. I had one episode between 2014 and 2016, and another one between 2017 and 2019. And I realized when I was in the depth of my burnout that I felt really alone, and it felt like everyone around me could handle everything, and that everyone around me was able to be on top of everything, as I said before. So it was very lonely, and I felt frustrated, and I felt like an outsider or someone who was a failure, who was not able to do what the world expects us to do. And it was only when I started reading about it and studying it that I finally understood that it wasn't my fault, that it wasn't that I came with a defect or something like that, that we have a culture that is praising overwork, that is praising addiction to work. There is a concept called workaholism, that is when you become addicted to your work. And that happens when your self-worth and your identity is really, really tied into your work. And when you see how our culture is praising it, how performance has been a fetish on how many steps we're taking a day, how many hours we're sleeping a day, how many hours we're working a day, what are the numbers that we're getting, It is not necessarily a bad thing to care about the numbers and to care about performance. It is a thing that happens and it's a way of measuring, but it is one way of measuring. And I'm afraid, and a lot of people who are talking throughout this week are having a sense that instead of looking at this as one way of seeing things, we are taking as the way of seeing things. So I'm asking us here to take a step back and start questioning ourselves and start reflecting what really matters and why are we jumping into this treadmill? Why are we like the hamsters in the hamster wheel, running and running and with a feeling that we're never getting anywhere? When the psychoanalyst Herbert Freudenberger, which is a German psychoanalyst, who was based in the United States in the 70s, he developed the clinical concept of burnout in the 70s. He brought up two concepts, two main spheres and dimensions where burnout occurs. When you have a huge disconnection in terms of identity and in terms of expectations. What does that mean? I'll take a sip of water and then I'll explain. I'm going to do a little bit of suspense here. Identity. What that means is, for some reason, since we are kids, since we're being brought up in our families, and it's not it hasn't been done obviously consciously or with bad intention or anything, but every family, every group of people that function as a family system has their own sets of values, of myths, of beliefs and affirmations, such as people in our family tend to do this way, tend to perform this way, tend to behave this way, tend to see life this way. When we're kids, we're very eager to understand deeply what are these unsaid rules of any system of family and school, so we can better adapt to it, so we can better sometimes respond to it. And depending on our personalities, we will want to reject that or we will want to embrace that. So when we start growing up, we see people who work really hard in our system of family, in our system in the world, are seen as so-and-so. People who don't work that much are seen as so-and-so. We grow up with this image. And then when we go to the workplace, we start seeing other people with their own family and brought up myths about work and about being busy all the time. And depending on what we have as a baggage and depending on how much we know ourselves, we start understanding that there is one person, there is one self that is our true self, that is who we really want to be, who we really are. And there's another self that is the self we think the world is expecting us to be. We think our families, we think our workplace, we think our communities are expecting us to be in a certain way. They expect us to say these things. They expect us to dress this way, to behave this way, to think these things. And what happens is, eventually, when these things are very distant from each other, when the self that you really are and the self that you're thinking the world is expecting you to be, when you're listening to this part of yourself, and you're only giving energy and time to the parts that you think the world is expecting you to be, you grow distant from your own self, from who you really are. And then eventually, and that has happened to me and to thousands or millions of people worldwide, you get to a point where you don't even recognize yourself anymore. With me, it happened in very subtle ways. It happened with punctuation in emails. You shouldn't use exclamation points. That doesn't give you the aspect of authority. You cannot be too friendly with people, otherwise you're not going to be respected. You cannot laugh loud. You cannot be like this. And I was learning every day how I should behave in order to be respected, in order to have some level of authority, in order to survive in that environment. And every day, a little part of myself was being pushed under the rug. And what happened is eventually I was starting to grow so distant from who I really was that I couldn't even remember what I was anymore. And what Freudenberg was going to say is that when in this distance between who you really are and who you think the world is expecting you to be, who the world is telling you to be, and this gap is the energy that you're using. And that's one of the reasons why we don't have energy anymore at some point. It's because we have been using, subconsciously, we have been using that energy day and night to be someone who we are not. The second aspect that he brings up is the aspect of expectations. And there's another gap there. There is what you're expecting and what the world is expecting of you, but especially what you're expecting of your efforts and what is the reality. Now, there's always going to be a space between who we are and between what the world is expecting us to be. And there is always going to be a space between what we expect and what is actually going to happen. But we don't know how to handle that. We don't learn. We're never taught that this is something that happens. And it is a life's work, learning how to live with that space and how to be aware of when is this space too much and what is an optimal space. In terms of expectations, what happens often is that we set ourselves in such a high bar that we want to do everything. We want to be the perfect employee. We want to be the perfect person, the perfect friend, the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect teacher, the perfect mentor, the perfect community member. And that is something that it is impossible. And sometimes we are aiming for something that is impossible. And eventually reality catches up. And then we realize that we have been growing distant from ourselves and we have been working our asses off towards something that is unreachable. For many reasons, it is unreachable. And what happens is that eventually we collapse because we have been for too long, for too far, expecting to be and expecting to reach something that wasn't even there. So my first question here, my first aspect of how can we build a future that doesn't deplete us is to understand that the more we are able to understand individually and collectively who we really are, express who we really are without prejudice, without limitation, without discrimination, and the more we can adjust exactly what we're doing to a possible reality, and the more we can become more empathetic and compassionate to the fact that we're going to expect something and that may not turn out the way we expect, and that's okay, and that will always happen, that there will always be a space between what we're expecting to accomplish and what is actually accomplished. To sit with that feeling is something that some people eventually learn with life. Some people become ill, chronically ill, on the attempt of trying to get there, but it is something that all of us have to come in terms with. I have explained here one of the many nuances of burnout, which is the emotional, psychological, psychoanalytical aspect of it, and it was just scratching the surface. There's other many dimensions to this issue, And one of the things that I also want to address, I have done the opening panel in Portuguese yesterday, and the content has gone in a different way, also because I understand that other audiences and other languages, we have been seeing different things being said about burnout. So if you are not Brazilian and you're watching, in my home country, we are still really on the baby steps. We're crawling in terms of awareness. That's why this event is so important. But also, when I watch people talking about burnout in English, for instance, and in other parts of the world, I see that burnout has become a verb. I am burned out. I am burning out. You are going to burn out. And I use the expression responsible awareness towards this event for a reason. There's a difference between being tired and having a burnout. The researcher Christina Maslow, which is the strongest reference and the most recognized reference on research on burnout in the world today, alive today, she wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review just a few months ago, saying that we need to find ways of ethically measuring burnout, because it has been it has been part of our culture now, saying that we're burned out, that we have burnout. And there's a very big difference between being stressed, between being on edge, being tired, exhausted, and actually collapsing on a burnout. And I want to bring that to the attention of you all, because if we start using this term interchangeably with any situation, we might be losing the actual focus of what is a really important part of the problem. That is, there are people who are not able to work in a traditional sense of work, on being paid in an office for an X amount of hours a week for years, because they have collapsed. And when we start saying, I have burned out, I feel burned out, we're saying, a lot of the times we're saying, I'm tired this week. But this is different. The goal of this week, of everything that I do, is to bring acknowledgement and to bring information to the people who have gone over the edge and have collapsed. And that is something that we cannot make invisible again. We have made that invisible for most of our time. And I'm afraid that once we start throwing that word around, we're going to make that invisible again. When we talk about burnout, it's important that we understand there is much more of a spectrum than a light switch. So there is indeed a risk. Everyone who has been slightly stressed and whose stress has been kept, who has not released that stress in a way, who has not been able to rest properly recently, and has been carrying on that stress chronically, you are indeed in risk of actually going through a burnout. So if you think about a spectrum where on one hand you have I'm going to use this because it's inverted. On one hand, you have here in the beginning, you are lying down on your couch watching Netflix, zero stress, watching comedy on Netflix, not watching a scary movie, zero stress. You get up and you go to work, and then as your day evolves, you start building stress, which is a part of us. It's not a problem. It's not a bad thing. We're going to talk to Kathy Mann, who is now an Agile master at BMW in South Africa. She's also a writer, and she has been writing and studying stress. And she wrote a book called Harnessing Stress, where she shows that stress is not the enemy. Stress is not necessarily a bad thing. What is a bad thing is chronic stress, and is tying up the stressful situations when they are bad situations, when they are situations that bring us some level of suffering. Coming up with a great event like this is stressful, but it is a good type of, it's a good type of busy, it's a good type of stress, and it's one that I can release from time to time. So it's very important that we understand the difference between the two of them. So I was saying we are watching Netflix, and then we start working, and we are studying, we're doing something that we enjoy doing, and then something happens. And you have a deadline, and you need to work around the clock, and you need to not get a few hours of sleep as you would do normally. But then eventually the weekend comes, or you have a holiday, and then you can rest. And then you release all that stress, and you go back to the beginning. What happens when someone burns out is we start in this same baseline. We start building up stress, and we have another overwork, and one more day, one more week, one more year, one more decade for some of us. And you can add to that harassment, abuse, traumas. And this stress has never been released. You're never able to sit back and to compensate all that stress that you're taking up in your mind and in your body. And eventually you make it all to the extreme. And that's why I say you take it over the edge. A lot of us have some specific moments, has this turning point. One day that you couldn't get out of bed, one day that you actually had a breakdown of any sort. And some of us are just piling up to one day you don't even recognize who you are anymore. Once you reach that point of over the edge, the most difficult part is to accept that. Because in order to accept that you have a burnout, that you have burned out, and that you have gone over the edge, and I'm not saying here, again, I'm not saying I'm feeling burned out, I'm feeling not, I'm feeling cynical about my industry, I'm feeling very exhausted, I'm not feeling hopeful, but maybe if I take a few days off, I will be okay. I'm talking about someone who has tried to do that over and over again, and it doesn't work until the point where you literally cannot get out of bed for days or weeks. Once you get to that point, accepting that that has happened to you is extremely challenging, because accepting means that you were wrong about what you thought you should be doing with your days, that you were wrong about who you thought you were. You have been wearing a mask for too long, and sometimes you don't even recognize who is under that mask anymore. And that is really painful to come to terms with. You realize that a lot of the things that you have been taught about work are not exactly true. And depending on how early you're able to get help or how late you're able to get help, this will mean that you have been dragging pain for a really long time. After you get to a point of acceptance, things do not necessarily get easier, but they do get another layer of meaning. We start feeling afraid. I have felt afraid I was never going to be able to work again for a while. I thought that I was going to have to retire by the age of 30. But eventually, with time, we realized that sometimes most of us, the vast majority of us, is able to go back to doing something that is meaningful and that is in accordance to your own limits and to your own time. It takes a long time to actually recover from a burnout. It may take 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. Dr. Jerry Puleo, who will be here on Thursday, talking about why employees burn out and what leaders can do about it. She has been doing some research and finding that In a few years ago, we think it would take an average of 2 years to recover from a burnout. And now the number is growing to 2 to 5 years to a fully recovery. And even when you fully recovery, it becomes something chronic in the terms of you're going to have to watch out the rest of your life. So the purpose of talking about it on all of the different levels, on the physiological level, on the psychological level, on the cultural level, on the organizational level, is to prevent people from getting over the edge. Because once you get over the edge, it's going to be so much more difficult to regain your trust in yourself, to regain the fire that you have lost, metaphorically. But if you're there and you have been already there, it's also okay. We are going to play the blame game for a long time. We're going to ask ourselves, why did I allow myself to get to this point? And there's a lot of reasons why there's so many people burning out today, especially because we are in a culture that praises overwork, as I just said. We are fostering addiction to work. We are, with our technologies and with our home office, the frontiers between personal life and professional life, they do not longer exist. They no longer exist. And that is something that our generation and a few generations prior to us are learning how to live with. Because until a few generations ago, you would go out of your house to your work, and then you'd go back to your house, and you could not perform work from your house. Your work was all the way there in a factory or somewhere else. And now your work is in your pocket 24/7. And for some people, we use leisure as a way of working and working as a way of leisure. So all of these frontiers are blurred. I don't have a magic formula that will solve all of this. What I do have is a bunch of questions and an invitation for all of us to reflect on, why are we still collectively exploring everything until our exhaustion? Why, when Netflix, for instance, launches a TV show called Squid Game, that is a really interesting portrait on how far we have to go in terms of survival, of financial survival. And if you have watched that, you probably realized and you probably understood that that is a really rich metaphor to the workplace. We are competing. We are fed into this organism that gives us the idea that only one of us can survive, that only the best of us can survive, the only best company can survive. And then what happens is, when someone actually manages to get to the top, to the hypothetical top, this person, if this person is not a psychopath, this person will understand that they had to go through so much and they had to play with such dirty rules that it is painful to get to the top. I was an executive in Brazil, and it was painful for me to see who was in the top with me, the laws and the ethics of the people surrounding me, the things that people are agreeing to do around me, the division between who was earning a lot of money, who was earning less money, the people who the people who were brought up into wealthy families, and the people who actually had to go against the odds to get an education and actually try to get a place there. Once you get to that top, to that summit of success, quote unquote, you realize that the game is really, really unfair. And that is another type of pain as well, which is, I had to go so far. I had to negotiate so much with who I really am. I had to see so many people go through so many unfair things for my own benefit. I really want to believe that when something like a pandemic happens, when something individually really heavy happens, there is a pathway for a transformation. And because I felt very alone when I had my burnout, I was able to understand eventually that it wasn't only my problem, and that it was something systemic, that was something a lot bigger than me, that was orchestrating all of us and all the ways that we are living our lives and relating to work as if it's something that should provide us with a fulfillment that no other area in our lives should, which is a lie. We have several areas in our lives. We have our personal relationships, we have leisure, we have our personal development, we have our families, we have friends, we have communities, we have nature, for God's sake. And all of these areas are important and meaningful. And we have been built up in this narrative that work should be everything for us. And it's not. And once we realize that it's not, a lot of us have been giving everything to it. And then we realize that has been a huge mistake. And then it takes a while to accept that. But as I said, it is not something individual. And what I see and what I have been seeing since I started studying it and reading about it 4 years ago and going through it is that we are going by ourselves individually. We have been going on individually about something that is social, that is systemic. And a lot of people have been speaking and have been creating amazing things that bring awareness to people about how this is not an individual problem. And my goal with this Awareness Week, with my book and everything else that I do, is to perhaps collaborate with other people as well, and to bring you who are watching the understanding that we do not get to a burnout by ourselves, and we will never solve this. We will never get to at least start a journey or a way of recovering and preventing it if you look at it in an individualistic way. We need to think of it as, if a person in an organization has burned out, that means there is something very important in that organization that needs to be addressed. It was not the individual's problem. If someone in a family burns out, it means that there's something in that family, in that surrounding, that also needs to be addressed. The problem of one of us is the problem of all of us. Producing this event has been in itself a challenge and lessons in terms of everything that I have said, especially in terms of expectations, in terms of negotiating every day with what I was expecting it to be and what is turning out to be. And for that reason, it has been really interesting. And I have taken the optics of using my work as a way of healing myself and perhaps helping others healing themselves as well. So I'm always focusing on what I need to heal and what I need to look into. And then I bring it up to you. So you can do whatever you want with it. During these last few weeks, I have had a much higher hours of work. I have been working for a lot more hours than I'm used to. I have been doing different things, and I have been distracting myself sometimes. And then eventually I realize, and then I come to my senses and I stop and I realize, okay, you are doing all of that thing again. And you are trying to do something that is impossible to do, especially if you're doing it by yourself or if you're doing it with a small team. And let's just take a deep breath and see what is truly meaningful and truly important to do. And because of that, every day I've been learning a little bit. And the different perspective of it is also extremely meaningful, because I could go to bed every day thinking of everything that I have not done. I wanted to invite these people. I wanted this person to respond to me. I wanted to have done more things in this thing and that and that. There's so many things, and there are a lot of traits that a lot of us who end up burning out have in common. I do not talk about them that often because I am aware of the fact that this might lead to organizations and people discriminating against some of us. So it's not something that I do in public because I don't want to enable discrimination in any level. But I will say that my mind works at 120 kilometers per hour. I don't know how much that is in miles, so you can do your own conversion, but it is a lot, and it's a lot of internal chat. With years of therapy, with psychoanalysis, with support of friends and family and study, I have been learning how to be around this internal chat that is constantly, it's a whole gang inside of me talking and telling me what I should be doing, how I should be doing, what I'm doing wrong. And especially the part that says what I'm doing wrong and I'm not competent. That one, I have been paying a lot of attention on that one and working really hard on telling this part of myself, I understand that you want to protect me, but this is not necessary, and I appreciate. And this has been extremely important for me, because if I would only listen to the part of myself that tells me about what I cannot do, about what I did not do, about what I do not know, I wouldn't leave my bed. So I would like to start wrapping up and tell you that we are in a culture that is pressing us to only pay attention to what we're lacking of. We don't have that model of that phone that just came out, or we don't have that filter and that camera, or we have not been to that place, we did not read this article, and then we start feeling this fear of missing out, a fear of not being everywhere, fear of not knowing everything that's going on. There are so many things about burnout coming out, so many books and articles, that if I didn't have a very strong internal compass, I would go crazy, because I would start expecting myself to know every single thing that has ever been published about the topic. But that's not sane to do. So instead of focusing on everything we don't have, everything we are not able to do, I want to invite you to start paying attention to what you do have, to what you do, to what you do accomplish every single day, and celebrate that. I had to go really deep down the rabbit hole to start learning to celebrate. And this has been one of the most important transformations in my life. I had to learn to celebrate having taken a shower. I had to learn to celebrate doing the dishes. I had to learn to celebrate going to the supermarket and not feeling panic about it. I had to learn how to celebrate walking around the block, doing a 1-hour meeting. And once you lose so much and you start regaining it again and you start valuing the small things again, it might be very easy to start taking all of that for granted. And I'm here to tell you that nothing is guaranteed of us. Nothing is granted for us. Nothing is promised. There's a sonnet by Lin-Manuel Miranda, who is a composer of musicals and someone that I am extremely fan of. And he says in a sonnet, nothing here is promised, not one day. And I know it may seem a little bit weird that on one hand I'm telling about all of the injustices that we have, and on the other hand I'm saying nothing here is promised. But it is of the essence of our existence that we need to be able to sit with contradictory ideas, is that we have to fight and we have to request and to voice for a lot of things that should be better. But on the other hand, we need to sit with the feeling that nothing is actually promised to us and that we have to be thankful for anything that we get, and especially anything that we are able to do. So I want to thank you all for watching. It has been a long time that I haven't spoken this long in English in public. So I appreciate you all very much for being here with me. Depending on where you are in the world, this is very early. So I really appreciate it. My father is here saying good morning to everyone. I wish a great day to my dear daughter, which is me, and to everyone who will share these spaces that are so meaningful to everyone during today. Good vibrations. Thank you. And Carla, which is a volunteer of our event, is also here. Thank you very, very much for being here, for paying attention. It means a lot to me. And I want to leave you with a few things to think about. We're going to have 4 panels in English, the rest of them, which are the other 17, which is a lot, in Portuguese. So if you want to train your Portuguese, you're free to do so, but watch them in your own time. If this is too much, it's okay. I will not impose on you anything. The panels are going to be recorded and they will be always available in this very same link. Take care of yourself. The care, the ethics of care, of work that has to do with internal work, of maintaining our own well-being, is so often overlooked and undervalued, but it is what keeps us alive. So whenever we see ourselves in these dynamics of valuing what is productive and of myself valuing over taking care of myself, doing my therapy and yoga and writing for myself, if I see myself valuing more doing a live panel in English than actually being with my family, than doing my own self-work, I need to stop and reflect on that, because that's not something that I was born with it. I was taught to value one thing over the other. And all of us need to make that shift. Be kinder to yourself. Focus on what you do have just for today and see what happens. Believe that it is possible to be a little bit different. It can be a little bit overwhelming to think about all of the things that are going wrong. And I was listening to a podcast earlier about the state of things that are happening in Brazil with all of the inequality that has been growing since the pandemic. And I started thinking to myself, how can I be talking about mental health when there's people who are actually starving? And then I had to reflect to myself, I am doing what is meaningful for me. And if I'm able to do something to address another problem, I will do so the way that I can. But we also need to be very mindful that we are not able to change the world. We're able to help and we're able to serve a little bit. And it's always less than we're expecting. One thing that I try to do is I tend to think of giant things of awareness weeks with 20 panels and stuff like that. And then I always have to make the effort and the practice of thinking, okay, what if I do a little bit less? And that's how I can start doing anything. And when you start doing less and a little bit easier, which is also something that we have learned, that things have to be hard and you need to have a lot of effort, but things can also be easy. We can allow ourselves to the easy. And it's okay to be easy. A small gesture can really make a big difference. I have started this event in my own Zoom account, inviting the people who I already knew, talking about things I saw on their profiles that it seemed like it would make sense for them to talk. I didn't do much in the beginning. I knew how to make an email. I knew how to make a little bit of a page, which is something that thankfully my previous experience allowed me to do. So now I'm using it to an actual good cause. But I did what I could do. If I was able to sit everyone in the same room physically, I would have done that. I had to do everything online because I'm in a city where I don't have that many close relationships. And I have used those limitations to my own advantage in a way. So think about what is something that's small that can make a big difference. I want to thank the panelists who are going to be throughout this week with us. Today we have Thorsten Jonas, who is German, and he's going to talk about sustainable user experience and his journey from being a UX strategist who had a burnout to reconnecting with nature and reconnecting with himself. And from that, he has created this amazing project, which is shifting the focus on the customer and the user to the focus on sustainability and the focus on everything and the whole environment. And this is a very much needed shift that we need to do. On Thursday, we have Jerry Puleo, which is a PhD. She has been studying burnout and work-life balance for over 20 years. She's in the US, and she's going to talk about why employees burn out and what can leaders do about it. So this is a very good panel to send to your boss. On Friday, we have Kathy Mann from South Africa. She's a writer. She now works as an Agile Master on BMW, and she has written 2 books on burnout. And we will talk about coming back to work after a burnout, because she has done the self-employed journey for a while. She still works with raising awareness. She's still a writer, but now she's also doing a full-time job, which is something that is very interesting to hear that story. How can you go back to a full-time job after a burnout? Which can be very challenging. And a lot of us may think that we're never going to be able to do that. She's doing that, and then we'll see how is her story. Thank you so much, Ana Paula. Aline, my sister, morning, congratulations on this event. I love you too. Isa, are you the Isa that I think you are? I think it's my English student, Isa. I don't know if she is. Anaí, Raquel, welcome every one of you. I am a writer, facilitator, and investigator of mental health at work and burnouts, and I am a part-time English teacher to my nieces. Yes! Welcome, Isa. So now we're doing a practicing session. She is my niece and she's my goddaughter. Isa and her sister, Mariana. I love you both. And up here, there's a painting from Isa. And there, you cannot see, it's out of frame a little bit, but it's a picture of the both of them, which I love with all my heart. Thank you so much for your attention and for your time. They are immensely valuable to us. Our next panel in English will be at 6:30 European time, 2:30 Brazilian time. I will leave the link here on the chat. And we will have, for the Brazilian-speaking attendees, I will retrieve the link of the next one, which will happen in an hour and 5 minutes. And the non-Portuguese speaking will excuse me a little bit because I'm going to say the title of the panel in Portuguese. And the title is Caminhos Terapêuticos para a Síndrome de Burnout, with two psychologists that will talk about approaches on how to treat burnout. And it's a really lovely panel. After that, we're going to have a panel also in Portuguese about harassment at work. And then we're going to see Thorsten at 6:30 German time, 2:30 Brazilian time. If you want to request a participation certificate in Portuguese, I'm going to leave the link in the chat below that you can fill up your presence. Help us spread the word about Burnout Awareness Week. Share this event to your network. Use the hashtag Burnout Awareness Week on your networks. Help raise awareness and fight stigma. The content we are sharing with you throughout this week can be very useful to someone close to you. I'll see you in the next panel. Take care and goodbye.